In the previous movie, we looked at creating a layout grid. Now, a layout grid is typically used in conjunction with a baseline grid. In this document, the baseline grid is already established. I'm going to turn it on, and then we'll look at another example where we create the baseline grid from scratch. So to turn on the baseline grid, come to the View menu, Grids and Guides, Show Baseline Grid. And you can see that the baselines of the type now sit comfortably on that baseline grid. So let's come to this document where there is currently no baseline grid. And we see, first of all, let's look at the need for a baseline grid. This is what it will do for you. If you're working with multiple columns and you want the text to cross a line across the columns, then you need a baseline grid. There's no getting away from it. You can't really achieve it without. If I drag down a guide, we see that everything is in alignment with my two columns of body text until this point. But then when I introduce a paragraph that is at a different size with different spacing, as I'm doing with the paragraph called second subhead, everything is going to fall out of alignment. So how can we make sure that everything stays in alignment? Well, there are a few different things to consider. When working with a baseline grid, I'll edit the body text style here. There are three options. You can align the text to the grid, you can not align the text to the grid, or you can align just the first line. Now we're going to see in this simple example an instance for each of these three options. But first of all, let's create the baseline grid. If we look at the body text, we note that its leading value is 13.2. So I'm going to create a grid with an increment of 13 points. Preferences. Windows uses your preferences at the bottom of the edit menu. Preferences, grids, and then baseline grid. I like to set the color to light gray, just a personal preference. I like to start at 0 relative to the top margin, and then the increment, I'll make that 13 points. And the view threshold, this is the view at which the grid becomes visible when it is turned on. If you're working on a laptop, you might want to reduce this number. I think the default is 75. You can see that I've reduced it down to 50. And personally, I like to deselect this option because I want my grids in front. I'll click OK. And if the grid is shown, we will now see it. So if you need to see it, Grids and Guides, Show Baseline Grid. But as you can see, the text is not currently aligned to the grid. I'll now select one paragraph of body text so that that's highlighted on my paragraph styles panel. Right click and edit that style. Indents and spacing, align to grid, all lines. And everything explodes, goes horribly wrong. And this is what can frighten people about grids. So the issue is that my body text is using auto leading, which is in this case 13.2 points. So it will miss the first increment of 13 and jump to the next. So visually what we have here is a leading increment of 26 points. So we need to come to our body text style, and we will change its leading value to a fixed amount of 13. Big improvement. But the problem now is the subhead. The subhead, which was created based on body, it has inherited this property. It is aligning all lines. So the amount of spacing that was formerly built into the subhead is being overruled by the fact that it is locked to the grid. And it's okay, it's just the problem is that it's maybe a little bit too close to the text which follows. It would be nice if we could have a little bit of space beneath the subhead. So what I'm going to do here is I am going to not align these subhead paragraphs. But I need to, in order for this to work, I need to make sure that I build in the right amount of spacing into the paragraph. And by right amount, I mean a multiple of the grid increment, which is 13. So I'm going to reduce the space before down to 10 points, and I'm going to add 3 points of space after. And then on the control panel, I'll come and make sure that this is not aligned to the baseline grid. And then I will update that style, redefine style. So we see that the subheads actually come off the grid, but that's okay because the next paragraph of body text goes right back on it. And it allows us to just distribute the spacing above, mainly above, but also have a little bit below as well. So that's the second approach that we can take. We have the body text aligned to the grid, the subheads not aligned to the grid, but mathematically in sync with it. And then we have these caption styles. Now these caption styles, which I think should be a little bit bolder, that's going to not have any effect on the grid, but it will just look a little bit better. These have a leading value of 10 points. If I were to put the leading value to 13 points, that is too much for, I think, for their size. So the option that I will use here is to align these to the grid, but only the first line. So the first line aligns to the grid. Every line after that just does its own thing. So in a nutshell, those are the options that you have when working with a baseline grid.